Welcome to Game Development 01. My name is ⵗᵉᵃᵗ, and let's make something, right? I'm already in the process of making something. I'm making Gunless Goblin, and I just thought to take you along through my process and kind of maybe give you some tips and tricks so you can use yourself to get started on something. Right? We're going to talk about the ideation process overall, and then we're going to include some scoping, some inspiration, some familiarity that fit into that, and then end it with game design as like a final build up from your idea. So let's start with that idea. What I do is I just start listing things that I want or don't want. And very quickly, I'm just writing down single player, keyboard and mouse, not a shooter, movement, third person. And then from the no shooter thing, I'm kind of thinking like, okay, I got inspired by something else to think of new genres. And then I was like, what would I do as a new genre? And I thought gunless, because, I'm a proponent of new ways of game design, trying to step away from the shooter-esque feel of a lot of video games. So I thought to make that a point, and I put that in the name, right? Have gunless be a thing. And then from there, I was just kind of looking at a list of words that started with G to just maybe come up with a name. And I saw Goblin, and I thought, okay, that makes sense. So Gunless Goblin. Then obviously you arrive at a Goblin player character, and then obviously someone has to have guns. And I still wanted to try and keep a fantasy setting with the Goblin there, so cowboys. Also mix it up a little bit because I thought a medieval castle with a Goblin would be too on the nose. So yeah, and then, as I said, movement in third person. So from that idea, from that basis, you can then scope out, right? And the point is to make the scope as small as possible to get things done. And, that is more important than trying to do things perfectly. And that's my point with this quote. So use your time wisely. And, the point is to set clear and achievable goals early on to make it easy for yourself and others to work on the game or like a different project. For me, I arrived at, doing one player character, the Goblin, obviously, then having a couple enemies, as few as possible. It's not a clear goal, but I still have some game design steps to go through to determine what the minimal amount of enemies would be. So that's why it's a little vague. But at least think about the fact that you don't want to do too many enemies because that would be too much work. Stylized art style because realism takes a lot of time. Steam as a release platform, 2 months as a time limit, because it makes you think about whenever you're investing too much time into something. You only have 2 months and you're spending a whole week on one small thing, then you're like, okay, well, this is obviously not worth it, right? It's a lot easier to make those calculations. And then we're just going to do one level. I'm cheating a little bit because it's just one really big level, but, limit ourselves somewhat. Then from that scoping process, I want to draw attention to drawing inspiration, right? And inspiration can come from every corner, where I'll show you I drew inspiration from Attack on Titan, I drew inspiration from Minecraft, I drew inspiration from Monument Valley, I drew inspiration from a meme, just for the vibe of the little goblin, adorable. And then this YouTube video that was about a genre called expressive platformers gave me the idea for the gunless genre. And then Dying Light, very good game for the movement, and the threat also. And then Call of Duty Zombies, which was the main inspiration. And the point of inspiration, like using other forms of media to enhance your own idea, is to catch the vibe of those other forms of media, or similar forms, but other media, right? It's to emulate the feeling. For me, for Call of Duty Zombies, it was to emulate the feeling of being on edge, right? Being chased and getting so good at that it can be in the back of your mind that you're being chased and you're just kind of chilling. Um, that's what I was going for. And so I'll talk a little bit about, where these inspirations come from and how I'm using them. I'm using Dying Light mainly as a mechanics inspiration. I know that the traversal in Dying Light was satisfying, so I know it's a good baseline for good movement systems, right? And so I can base my own goals and ideas off of that, right? I can also say for scope that this took a lot of time for them to make, right? In some areas, it also saved them time, but it also cost them a lot of time to get there. Now, I don't have to reinvent the wheel because I know they did this, and I know certain things they did, and I know it worked in the end, right? So I have those things going for me. They had to spend a lot of time to figure things out for the first time. So interesting how that works. Then Minecraft gave me an idea from the ⵗᵗᵃ. So if you don't know, Minecraft voxel game, you should know it. And the ⵗᵗᵃ is basically just a fruit that you can eat, and then it teleports you somewhere randomly nearby, by the way, so not far away or anything. It's just, this is a funny case where they're eating a ⵗᵗᵃ above ground and then get teleported into a cave right below them, next to a creeper, incidentally, but whatever. So this helped me come up with an idea for a game mechanic. It doesn't have to be a final game mechanic. I might not even use this, right? But it's to show you that you just grab small things from a game, and if that brings you to something, that's cool. You don't have to grab like other things all from Minecraft or something just because you got inspired by one thing. So then we have this, the YouTuber is called Slippy Boy, and he talked about expressive platformers as like a genre idea that they're trying to do. And I got the gunless genre as an idea from this. Then, inspired by art and nature, I always look up art that people have made around something that I'm trying to do. Helps a lot. People are really good. And in this case, it's just, putting Western architecture and a cowboy Wild West vibe up against a rock. And I like that a lot. And then I also got inspiration from Attack on Titan. And I think it's very important to look at other media, same with the art, aside from video games, to get other artists their impressions of certain things, right? This is a chase scene that I grabbed from Attack on Titan. And it's very interesting how the flow is different than from what a video game would focus on, right? They have a lot of focus on the human reactions of like Levi turns a corner and sees the enemies there. That's like a very, that's a beat, right? Like that's a moment in a video game that would pass by very quickly because most video games are just kind of real time, right? Of course. But in anime, they can kind of like flexibly slow down time and you don't really notice because they do it for really short amounts of time. And they mostly do it to emphasize a point. I think this was a vital moment for me also here where the people react to him flying in. I think that's also very, very important because I wasn't thinking about that, right? I was only thinking about the player and the enemy, and I wanted it to feel like a town. So obviously there has to be other people besides like hostiles that also react to you flying through. So yeah, use inspiration to build on your own idea and concept. And then I want to talk a little bit about familiarity, where you use familiar themes, but then mash them to make something more unique, right? So we have Wild West, which is a very familiar theme, goblins, which a lot of people are also familiar with, but then goblins in the Wild West, right, is a little more unique. But people still know what it is because it's combining things that they're familiar with. So that's important, is the combination, right? You have cowboys, you have Monument Valley, you have Western Wild West architecture, you have wizards, you have goblins, and you make it more unique by doing a twist, right? If you just had a game with goblins, it's not that unique if you're just mowing them down, right? Done before. But if you make the goblin the main character, then that's already a little more unique. And then if you're combining all those things into something, then that's also more unique. But people still understand what it is, right? It's not too out there where people have to, try and understand everything at once. They can understand it in chunks, and that's important. Familiarity also helps in this way, where people understand cowboys and they know cowboys have guns. That's how it works. So use that to your advantage. So then we come to, last but not least, game design, where we now have a fleshed out idea, or an idea, right? We thought about some things, and we now have like a little bit of an idea where you are a goblin running away from racist cowboys chasing you with guns and spells. And that's a basic idea. And then from there, you can think about game design. What do you need to make this function as a game concept, right? And I made a little bit of an example here because this is still something that I'm currently doing, right? This is not part of things that I've already done, but I'm currently working on this, right? I've identified that for a movement game where you're a goblin in like a high-rise western town against a mountain valley mountain, you need a movement system. Right? So imagine what options you want the player to have to traverse the map, and then you can use existing movement systems to make like a long list of things you like, and then try and cut it down. Right? Try and see what you can get away with as minimal as possible. Right? Think of the scope. Don't make it too big because you can. Think about how to make it as small as possible while still keeping it fun for you and the player. Right? And then I want to explore a drama system where we're using the Attack on Titan inspiration to add some time slow and see if that can add more depth to the game, right? Does the player have enough options in those moments where they encounter an enemy and it slows down time to keep it entertaining? If they just have one button to press every time and the slow-mo's too long, then it's going to get boring very quickly every time they encounter an enemy, right? Like I want to add a lot of enemies, so that's going to be very boring. So I have to think about game design. I have to think about when is it worth to slow down time? When do you do that? What can a player do when it happens? Important, right? Of course, these systems and things that I'm proposing are examples. For you, it would be different, right? You have to think of your own stuff. And I'm just showing you how it flows forth from idea to inspiration to scope to, you know, the game design systems that you end up with. Then I want to also do a magic food system. I talked about the course fruit in Minecraft, where because of that, I came up with a mechanic where the goblin's stomach is growling when they're hungry. So this gives me a great tool to balance energy levels of the goblin, right? If you run too much, then maybe you get punished by being hungry. And then being hungry, you know, reveals your position because your stomach is growling. And then if you should try and find food, and then I could enhance that whole system by having different foods, and some of them also have special effects, right? Giving the game some more depth without adding too much complexity for getting started with it, which is also, always good as a game designer to try and do. Um, so yeah, those are the steps. You grab your inspiration, you think about the familiar themes and try and keep a cohesive idea. And then all the while you keep scope in mind and you kind of like play around those three, and then you work that towards a design where you can finally start game designing, different systems together to get a working thing. And so yeah, that was my presentation. I'm thinking about, you know, next next presentations where maybe I'll just give you a rundown of the tools I'm using to make games. Maybe also one on how to learn programming, like where to look, what to think about while you're programming, while you're new and don't know what's going on. Maybe also how to define an art style if you're looking to make a game by yourself and you're kind of struggling on how to, you know, go through all the different assets and art things that you like, and you're seeing like how do you limit yourself to specific style. And then also I really badly wanted to talk about paper prototyping on this one already, but this one was about ideation, right? I wanted to limit the game design to a minimum, or I wanted to keep that to a minimum, but it is really important. So just know that already, and I might do that one earlier, if I'm being honest. But yeah, that was my presentation on ideation on Gunless Goblin. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.